Almost 55 years ago, this movie earned a very negative reputation. Today, it's a cult classic. Whether now or then, this movie will have you saying, "My goodness," and give this podcast its first content warning. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Barbarella. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Bethany Wells, and joining me today for this special Valentine's Day episode is my lovely wife, Bethany. How are you, Bethany?
I'm great. Happy Valentine's Day, baby.
Happy Valentine's Day to you, too. And this was all you're doing.
You're welcome.
This was all you're doing. I am going to give a little bit of a content warning here, although we will keep it as clean as we can. We are talking about a movie and a comic book that is very sexualized. So there will be very suggestive and not explicit content, but we will be treading into a gray area.
If you don't want to answer a bunch of big questions, maybe don't let little ears listen.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump right into this because I think we're going to do a really big deep dive on this, just because it is a self-contained comic, so it's almost like just comparing it with a novel, or at least the version that this movie is based on. Barbarella did continue later in the years, but we're not going to talk about that. So we're going to do that, and also going to do kind of a deep dive on it, so that way I never have to talk about it again. All right, so let's get into the background of this. Barbarella was created in 1962 by French writer and illustrator Jean-Claude Forest. I don't know if there's a French pronunciation of that, but Jean-Claude Forest. It was a comic strip that was published through V Magazine, which I'm pretty sure is a fashion magazine. I couldn't find an awful lot about it. There is an American version that's a fashion magazine, and I don't know if it was maybe what became the American version. I don't know. But from what I could gather, back in the 60s, this magazine was very provocative, contained risque content, so very fitting that the Barbarella comic strip kind of got its debut in that.
Right.
In 1964, Eric Losfeld published the strips as a standalone book, and this is what I read. Bethany read a little bit of it. And
it was read to me. It was very romantic. Yeah,
we kind of read it together, and this is what the movie's based on. There was a revival of Barbarella in 2017. We're not going to get into those. They took more of a sci-fi, more, modern day comic feel, but we're not going to get into that.
I've heard that version is a lot more progressive when it comes to feminism, whereas this is almost like a introduction to feminism from the men's point of view. The more modern version of Barbarella is an actually feminist character.
I can see that. In fact, the 60 Barbarella the comic was deemed pornographic, and you could very much see why in those panels. Lots of nudity on the side of Barbarella's character.
More just like physical nudity and not like explicit images of like actual acts.
Yes, you do not ever see it. You see it begin, and then you see the after.
End.
Yeah,
which is kind of how the movie is.
Yeah, the movie does the same thing. The look and the style of the comic, there's a lot of detailed art. There's not really any color in it. It's mostly blues. Mm-hmm. It's all kind of muted tone, even in the blue. It's mostly just black and white. But that's what we have. That's the comic. And like I said, we're going to go deep dive into the comic as we get into this, but let's start talking about the film. So the film was produced by Dino De Laurentiis. Oh. And if you are familiar with that name, he is a legendary producer of such films like Flash Gordon, Dune, one of my favorites, the Evil Dead sequels. He did all of the Hannibal Lecter movies except The Silence of the Lambs.
So the good one.
Well, you know what? I like Red Dragon.
That is not what this podcast is about, Laramy.
And he's also, speaking of another thing I'm a big fan of, he's done several of the Stephen King adaptations.
Oh.
In fact, he has over 500 movies to his credit as a producer.
Good for him.
For any of you who are Food Network fans, you'll also, if you don't already know, he is the grandfather of the Food Network chef Giada De Laurentiis.
Oh, I love her.
So that is his granddaughter.
Aw.
So a little trivia fact there for you. The film was directed by Roger Vadim.
It's actually pronounced Roger Vadim because he was French.
Okay. So Roger Vadim.
Roger Vadim. You get on to me all the time for pronouncing names differently.
I pronounce names differently all the time. Again, he is French, and he was actually the then husband of star Jane Fonda.
Now, I know some people will hear that and think, oh, well, then he cast Jane Fonda, his wife, and that's the nepotism. There is some nepotism there, but she was the one approached first for this film. When they decided to make the movie, they reached out to Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda said no right out of the gate, but her husband was a huge fan of the comics, and she said he convinced her to do it.
Yeah. Jane Fonda was not the first choice.
No.
Dino De Laurentiis actually wanted Sophia Loren.
She was the person that the character was based on, wasn't she?
No, the character was based off of Brigitte Bardot.
Ah, okay. That makes more sense.
Which I've got in my notes and I'm going to get to in just a minute. But no, Dino De Laurentiis wanted Sophia Loren. She turned it down. They then went to Raquel Welch.
Oh, they wanted her to be touched by an angel? Is that not... That's not the same. Oh, man, so close.
Raquel Welch actually chose to turn it down to make a movie called Myra Breckenridge, which is actually considered worse than this movie.
That's a feat.
Yeah. So she was the third choice. Now that takes me back to director Roger Vadim.
For sure.
Because Jane Fonda was also his third wife. In fact, he would marry 5 times total.
I heard, based on the way he treated Jane Fonda in this movie and a few other things, he was not a great dude.
They would be married for another, I think, like 5 years. I think they divorced in 72 or 73.
Yeah. A lot of that had to do with her finally realizing that she didn't need to be treated the way he treated her.
Well, there also is a rumor that their relationship came from an affair, that he was actually having an affair with her while married to his second wife.
I think that, yeah, there's that, they had an open marriage, sort of, in the sense that they would have, here's where we get into our content warning. They would invite other people into their bedroom. Jane Fonda got to choose those people, and that was her way of trying to keep him from cheating on her.
All right, well, the movie was released on October 11th, 1968. It then got re-released, actually, in 1977. They cut out some of the more sexually implicit stuff and made it a little bit more in the PG realm, because PG-13 didn't exist at the time. So they put it a little bit more in the PG realm. They retitled it Barbarella, Queen of the Galaxy, and it was all to capitalize on the success of Star Wars.
Well, when I think of Star Wars, I think of Barbarella, obviously.
Sure. I don't, but sure.
It's called a joke. This is what the people in the biz call banter, Laramy.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the character Barbarella, and then we're just going to jump straight into the story. Jump straight into the moving panels, because the other characters, there's really not a lot to talk about, but we'll kind of hit them as they pop up, or as the variation of them pop up within the story. So as we talked about, Barbarella, played by Jane Fonda. A fun little trivia here, I found that Jane Fonda actually dubbed herself in the French dub because she can speak French.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Good for her.
Now, the creator, Forrest, believed that Barbarella embodied the modern, emancipated woman in the era of sexual liberation. And I will let you speak on that, Bethany.
All right, so we're going to get into talks of waves of feminism. All right, everybody, get out your notebooks. We are taking a test on this on Tuesday. Just kidding. So, if you're not familiar, there are different eras of feminism, and they're referred to as waves of feminism. The first wave focused more on the suffragette movement, just getting the right to vote, basically. The second wave, which is when Barbarella, when the comic was written, when the book was released, was more of that sexual liberation. Now, one of the things that was a common theme during this time was sexual liberation was really more illustrated as a male's fantasy with this facade of it being woman's liberation. So, yes, it's great that women want to have sex, but it's not focused on her pleasure. It's focused on this ideal. And you really see that, especially in those first couple of scenes. Like when Jane Fonda, she goes to like lay down on this bed, her whole spaceship looks like it's covered in shag carpet.
Looks like it's covered in Wookiee fur.
Yes. They skinned Chewbacca, hung him up on the walls, but her bed is this plexiglass sheet.
Well, it's not plexiglass because it bends. So
it's like a big condom that she's got. I'm so sorry, honey. Anyway, she's got to lay there, and it's like filming beneath her, and the whole point is for her to look sexy, but she's clearly the most uncomfortable human being on the planet. And something that's well known, something Jane Fonda talks about a lot, is during that time she suffered from an eating disorder. She was bulimic, binged and purged all the time. She talks about during this movie, anytime she had to eat or be drunk or be anytime she had to be naked,
she had to be drunk.
She had to be completely drunk because she was so self-conscious about the way her body looks, which seems wild considering she was just this huge sex symbol. Roger Vadim, he actually filmed 2 movies with her. Both of them, she was this sex symbol in the movie. So back to my talks on feminism. Second wave feminism took place in the 60s, went on for about 20 years after that. It focused on women's liberation, a woman's right to her body, trying to gain equality physically. Although, and this is kind of one of the downsides of second wave feminism, it also focused more on white women, not women of color. And that's just my brief history. It focused on issues like domestic violence, sorry for this word, but marital rape, things of those nature, stuff that wasn't considered at all was now being talked about, being brought into the general consciousness. It was great. It was a good step forward. Currently, we're in like the 4th, possibly the 5th wave of feminism. We're getting more and more into work equality and equality, not just among gender, but among racial equality within feminism. So, I'm a white woman, and so people look at me differently than another type of race. So these later waves of feminism are addressing those topics. So, yeah, that's really kind of the brief history of feminism. Give you a background.
So that gives an idea of where, again, creator Forrest believed this is where the character Barbarella kind of lied at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the look of Barbarella was actually inspired, as we mentioned earlier, by the French sex symbol Brigitte Bardot, who was a French sex symbol of the late 50s into the 70s. And coincidentally enough, she was also Roger Vadim's first wife.
Oh, Mr. Vadim. How dare you?
So there you go. So a character that was inspired, the look was inspired by his first wife, would then be played in live action by his third wife.
That's something else, isn't it?
There you go. Also, the lasting impression of Barbarella. Barbarella actually inspired Heather Graham's character of Felicity Shagwell in the Austin Powers The Spy Who Shagged Me.
I guess I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, she's got the hair, the big bushy hair, and she changes outfits a lot.
Constantly.
So that is Barbarella. Anything else you want to share about just the character of Barbarella?
I think my biggest issue with Barbarella, and we might get into this later, Barbarella doesn't do much. She is billed initially as this 5-star rated space ranger and does nothing except have sex, which is fine, but she's there to do something.
You're talking about the comic character or
the movie character?
Movie character, she's never had sex.
No, I'm talking about during the movie.
Yeah.
She doesn't do anything.
No.
She goes from place to place. She changes clothes. She has his sex.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things where it goes back into this. It's that early stages of feminism where, yeah, she's a warrior and she's a woman. Isn't that great? Yeah, that's great. But she doesn't do anything. There's one scene where she does something resembling something. And that's about it. Mostly she just changes outfits. And they're great outfits, don't get me wrong. But
do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes and VCRs and video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? If you want to go back to school, back to the future, or even back to the beach, then the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast is for you. I'm Tim Williams, the creator and host, and on each episode, I'm joined by a guest co-host as we revisit a different 80s flick to discuss our first-time watch memories, iconic scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. New episodes drop every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast.
All right, well, let's get into the moving panels. Again, we're just going to go deep dive into this. The idea of the comic strip is that, because this was a comic strip to begin with. I mean, full page inside the magazine. But
the movie feels like that. It feels like the Brenda Starr movie.
Yeah, it's very brief, kind of chapters, if you want to say. So it's intended to introduce the characters into a situation, no matter how bizarre that situation is, as we saw in this, and then take them out.
Right.
And then just move on. So you don't wear out the welcome or you don't get any deep, detailed explanation to anything. And a movie like this and comic like this just kind of has what I call a road trip feel. It just plays out with, okay, we're at this scenario and now that's gone. And now we're at this scenario
we're here,
and now that's gone.
This joke happens and now we leave.
And a character may travel, add to her travel and go with her to the next location, but they don't last long. And we'll get into that.
Yeah.
This pretty much the movie came almost straight from the comic. There is a lot of stuff in the comic, obviously, that's not in the movie. So we're just going to kind of break down the comic from cover to cover, and we'll talk about the moments in the comic as well as how they tie in to the movie. It starts off with her flying around space for what she says. She doesn't know if it's been days, weeks, months, but she does reveal that she's trying to forget a man. In fact, the exact quote is, "The features of the man who caused Barbarella's suffering fade from her memory until at last she is able to entertain the thought of someone new."
Blech.
Yeah. Now, of course, in the movie, we don't get this. We start off with her in her ship, and then we get a very infamous, as some people who say that don't really remember this movie, they remember the opening scene. And that is when Barbarella starts off in this really bulky spacesuit and then proceeds to take it off.
Yeah. You know what, though? It's cheesy, don't get me wrong. But it's a very well-filmed opening scene.
Yeah. So what they did was they're faking gravity.
Yeah.
And they didn't do wire work. And obviously this is the 60s, so we're not talking CGI or anything. What they did was they laid out a plexiglass floor and had a picture of the ship under it. And then they shot her from above, and she's just kind of moving around on the plexiglass.
And she does such an incredible job. Yeah. Like, she looks like she's floating in air.
Yeah, even the way when she removes a piece of clothing and she kind of tosses it, and the way it kind of spins on the plexiglass, like, it really looks really well for a practical effect.
Because I know you and I, when we watched it before we found out how they filmed it, we were like, how did they do this? Because it looked like she was floating in zero gravity, the way she was manipulating her body. And it's all Jane Fonda. It's all focused on her. Granted, it's sexualizing her in the most possible way, but that's the movie. That's the whole setup for the movie. And then even the like graphics for the credits, they like all sit at like just the right spot.
They try.
There's still some peekaboos.
But the credits do try to curve around, and
you never see certain spots.
Yeah. Yes. We'll move on from that. So we're introduced to her there. Then she receives and we've already talked about her ship, being all furry. Then she receives a message from the president of the world.
President of Earth, yes.
Yeah. Who then gives her a mission to find a scientist by the name of Durand.
And that is where the band got their name from.
Yep. And we'll get into more of that character once it kind of gets to that part of the story. I didn't pick up on this right off the bat, but apparently we were supposed to gather from this that the Durand is a 25-year-old scientist.
I did not get that until she says it
later.
Explicitly at the end.
Here's what I want to ask you about this one scene, and then we can move on from it. When she, when the video feed comes up, she stands up, and of course she is nude at this moment. Although we now see her from the back, and we only see, torso up. We see her from the back. She says, excuse me, I'll go put something on. And the president says, oh, no need.
Yeah.
And then proceeds to just continue to talk to her.
It's just kind of icky. Like, I kind of get what they're trying to do. And it's that this movie is a really good example of what the 60s thought the future was going to be like. It was a very, I think, optimistic about how sexuality was just going to be free. People are not going to care about nudity. It's just a whatever kind of thing. And that's my initial takeaway from it. I think, honestly, though, it was just an excuse to get to see as much Jane Fonda's side boob as we could.
Yeah. We might get into a little bit more of the political aspect of this when we get into our decisions and all. But he gives her weapons. Because,
which she's never seen before.
Yeah, because Durand has a ray, and he might start a war, and she's like, who would want to do a war?
Yeah.
Why, and so he gives her weapons, and there's this goofy bit of her holding all of these weapons, which she then just puts into storage on her ship and never uses again. Except for this one little gun.
She uses the teeny gun. See, back into the politics. I know you wanted to talk about the politics later. I find it interesting that this movie was made in the 60s with this idealistic idea of the future where people were preaching for peace and free love during the actual 1960s. And they're like, what we're doing one day is going to really change the world. And it is going to be free love. And it is going to be, no war.
Yeah, their salute to each other is
love.
Yeah.
But now sci-fi or futurist movies that take place in the future that were made now are all really dark and post-apocalyptic and
Star Trek's not. Star Trek, there's a united federation where a bunch of
I'm talking about now, like movies that are being like stories that are made now.
Like originating.
Not originating
okay, I'll give okay.
now.
Okay.
You got stuff like Maze Runner and Hunger Games and just basically and that was just something that struck me. I was like, it's sad that's where pretty much we're at this point of like hopelessness. Whereas during that time there seemed to be a bit more hope.
So she is sent to Planet 16 in this particular galaxy. In the comic books, the planet actually has a name. It's called Lytheon, is my guess way to pronounce it. And now we're going to get into the comics. There's a lot here that is not in the movie. So she crashes in a city, which is also a giant greenhouse, kind of like a biodome.
Okay.
And it's called Crystalia, the Great Greenhouse. I'm not 100% sure about the climate on the outside. She mentions icy winds because when she crashes, the icy winds start killing the roses in the room that she's
yeah.
in. But then they talk about the greenhouse being in the middle of a desert. And so I don't know if they're using the word desert to also mean nothing but snow.
Yeah.
It could be a snow desert. I don't know. But right off the bat, unlike the movie, is we know she is sexual. She is saved by a character named Danathus. And he says, "You're lucky to have survived, Earth Girl." And her reply is, "I could get luckier still."
Yeah, she could. Get it.
Yeah.
Get it.
She is sent to another village. I won't get into the story and all that because, like I said, it's not in the movie. But she's sent to another village by them. She is almost stoned. She is rescued by a guy called Ahan, who she then lays with right after they meet. And I do mean lays with. There's no implication of anything other than that.
Huh. I was about to say, is this like a biblical lays
No.
with?
This is, she needed to warm up. That was really...
Well, I've been there. Yeah.
And then she gets involved in some sort of war between these two villages. She goes to her ship for a weapon. There's a guard at her ship, which she then distracts by taking her shirt off.
That's distracting.
Yeah. She fakes a faint and then pounces on the guard and starts kissing him.
Huh.
Then a naked female character that we met earlier, she jumps on him.
Okay.
And in the next panel, he is laying under a pile of what kind of just look like a bunch of pillows. And we are to assume that they have worn him out.
They've laid with him.
Yeah. The line in the comic is, "He's in no shape to put up a fight now."
I bet he's not.
Yeah. So again, right off the bat, we know that Barbarella is all sexual. But like I said, in the movie, they make it clear off the bat that people don't really have physical relationships anymore.
In the movie, they make this point of saying like, and part of me wonders if it's this idea of this born sexy yesterday trope. I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast before, but it's this idea of a man gets to teach a woman how to do stuff, and she's sexy and she's an adult, but she's also kind of like a baby, and the man gets to teach her how to do all the little things. And it's a really gross trope, and I feel like that's kind of what was inputted into the movie, because it's sexier that they have to teach her how to be sexy, as opposed to her just already being experienced and knowing what she wants and how she wants it.
So the battle in the comic ends in peace, actually. They destroy this big weapon that would have, wiped almost everybody out. And then they end up finding out that the one tribe is actually not as bad as they thought they were. So it all ends in peace. Barbarella wants to celebrate. And so she was like, but who should it be? Danathus or Ahan? And then discovers both of them are busy with other people.
Oh, bummer.
So Barbarella finds a ship, another ship, because remember her ship crashed. So she finds a ship to leave on, and the pilot, Barbarella asks if there's room for her, and the pilot tells Barbarella, "I have a special place for you to sit."
I bet he does.
Yeah, and here's where we get a character that appeared in the movie. This is Dildano.
I have no way of pronouncing it that Laramy will be happy with. So
yeah, I'm sure you can figure out that Dildano clearly has to be a reference to something. In the movie,
in the movie, he's got a bunch of gadgets. Mm-hmm. Not all of them work. I think he needs to change the batteries.
Yeah. In the movie, he's played by David Hemmings. It's a very comedic part in the movie.
It's so weird.
And he comes way later in the story.
That happens sometimes.
And we can get into... We can go ahead and get into that scene. Let's go ahead and get into that scene.
Okay.
So I'll talk about later where this scene kind of pops up, because the scene's kind of self-contained. Like, it could have been anywhere in the movie. But she is rescued by Dildano in the movie, who takes her to his headquarters, which we imply is some underground bunker.
It's underneath their cage of birds.
And it's
Like
underneath
she-
everything is
Yeah.
what they pretty much imply. It's underneath the whole city that we'll talk about later. But he is the leader of a revolution, and he's trying to get her recruited.
Mhm.
Finds out she's from Earth, and he would like to
Make love to her.
make love to her in the way that the people on Earth do it.
And she is very disappointed by this
Yes.
because she has learned how the other people do it, and she really likes that.
Yeah, which we'll get into when she's introduced to that later. But the way Earth does it is through a pill.
Hmm.
And so he just so happens to have a pill for each of them.
Given to him by Durand.
Yes. And they both take the pill. They then sit on, I guess, the bed. They touch hands. And they proceed to have their moment. This reminded me a lot, and Bethany, I don't know how familiar you are with this movie. This reminded me of Demolition Man.
I don't know Demolition
Because
Man at
the
all.
same thing happens in Demolition Man, where physical sex is kind of done away with, and they do it through this. In that one, they put on these like headpieces, and that's how they experience it.
Okay.
So it's kind of the same thing, but they do it very comedic.
It's so funny because first of all, you hear like the bed jumping, like they're not moving.
No,
It's
they are.
literally-
They're both kind of like.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, they're kind of like. I don't know what the word would be. They're kind of
Bouncing?
bouncing. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Jane Fonda's hair like curls up.
Yeah, which is a really funny gag. I gotta admit.
I mean, I gotta say, one of the biggest positives, and there's not a lot for this movie. One of the biggest positives is Jane Fonda's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, so her hair curls. She then realizes it's curls. She actually takes her hand away from Dildano. He's still holding his hand out. He's lost in the moment. She, pulls
her
the
hair.
curls out of her hair. At this point, one of the other soldiers have arrived, and he's now just standing there watching this happen. Barbarella acknowledges him, realizes Dildano is still in the moment. She goes, oh, and then just kind of awkwardly puts her hand
And she
back.
looks at the guy and says, I'm sorry.
Yeah, puts her hand back on Dildano's so that he can
He can-
finish. Yeah. So another quick little trivia here I want to talk about with Dildano. He gives her a password. I am not going to be able to pronounce this at all.
Do you want me to try?
Go ahead.
Okay. Land fair plig lurker trinner drobbled in anti
Yeah. He says it in the movie. I probably should have gotten the clip. I may, if I have time, I'll edit it into the episode here.
Our rendezvous point will be at 1600 hours, and our password will be Llanfire Puthkin with Golgerich Quindrobel Lechlandithilio Go Go Go.
You mean the secret clan fire Pugandi Golgeric when Rohule clan de Helio go go go?
Exactly.
Fun little trivia fact. That's a real thing that he says. It is actually the name of a village in Wales. And
Oh
it
my
is famously known as a village with the longest name. And I'll even put it in the show notes so you can see how it's spelled and you can look it up yourself. It's very interesting. But back to the comic. This is again where she meets Dildano. He saves her in his ship. Although here's the thing, I even went back and looked at the panels. He never introduces himself, but later in a later panel, she calls him by name, and so
Yeah.
I guess we're just supposed to assume some time has passed. And
Is it possible that maybe the collection we have does not have all of the panels?
no,
Because you said it was something
this
like
was on the same page.
Okay.
Like it was literally on the same page. No, I don't know if it was maybe in the translation that something
Maybe.
got lost. Because again, it was originally a French comic. But they are in a ship which somehow is now in water.
For reasons.
I didn't understand that.
I'm not going to make a comment.
They're attacked by a giant jellyfish, which he says is a Portuguese man of war. It's just unlike on Earth. On this planet, they're able to grow to giant sizes.
Okay.
The ship then tries to come out of the water, And the panel of the ship is very, very phallic looking.
It really, really was.
So
Y'all, you can find this comic online. You've got to look it up. You will not believe us. It sounds like we're on drugs explaining a dream we had.
yeah. So the ship is attacked by the jellyfish. They then discover that there's a civilization inside the jellyfish.
Oh.
The people of this jellyfish civilization come on board. They ask her to disrobe.
As you do.
Yeah, we then have a quote in the comic that says, "It wouldn't be the first time I've disrobed just to see what would happen next."
Same, girl, same.
They spray her down because it's this chemical that is supposed to allow them to not be affected by the poison of the jellyfish.
Mm-hmm.
And they take her to their queen, who is Medusa. And it's supposed to be implied that this is the Medusa that inspired the mythological Medusa.
Okay.
And that people upon her gaze will die. But Barbarella actually gets the jump on Medusa, ties her up. And this is another thing where we kind of find out where Barbarella is not so much the peaceful pacifist that the movie led us to believe at the beginning.
Right.
Dildano, Barbarella takes Medusa, they get onto a ship, and somehow Dildano's there. I didn't quite figure out how Dildano all of a sudden got there, but he's now on the ship with them.
She just stuck him in her bedside drawer and she found it later.
Nope. Medusa then steals Barbarella's face. And this is what we find out, that instead of turning you into stone, she steals your identity, like turns into you. And then her followers don't want anyone else sharing the face of their queen, so they would then murder the person whose identity she stole.
Oh.
Yeah. And so that's why anyone who sees her face must die.
Oh.
Yeah. But they crash and Medusa dies for some reason. They don't quite explain it. Dildano and Barbarella escape. And all of a sudden it feels like they're on another planet. I don't know how, but we then find out later they're still on Lytheon, so this is where it got a little confusing. But now, this is where we meet a character named Strychno and a scientist named Cull. Now, I'm going to stop here for a minute because Strychno is a hunter. He's a hunter with a burly face, with hairy clothes, and so this is where we get now back into another character from the movie, although the character from the movie is named Mark Hand. And Mark Hand is played by, and I am going to butcher this name, Ugo Tognazzi. He's an Italian character actor who I found out that Bethany would be interested in this, is the guy that played Renato, or however you pronounce it, in La Cage aux Folles.
La Cage aux Folles.
La Cage aux Folles.
The birdcage.
Yeah, the birdcage, for those of you curious. And this is the character that is the mirror to Robin Williams' character from the birdcage.
I love the birdcage.
Yeah. So the same actor, Italian actor, played this. I want to also stop here and talk about how much it is so obvious that a lot of these actors are dubbed.
Yeah.
So clearly using a lot of French actors, using a lot of Italian actors, probably didn't speak English. In fact, we have one actor we'll get into later. He didn't speak at all. And, we can very much tell that they're dubbed. So I do think this is meant to be Strychno from the comic. The look is so similar.
The fur.
Yeah. However, the character is not. In the comic, Strychno is actually the villain. He has created, with the help of this Professor Cull, he has created these monsters that he just uses to hunt. However, a similar other connection is that when Barbarella is attacked, quote unquote, by a giant mole, there's this giant mole that shakes the building she's in. It collapses. She lands on top of the giant mole. Strychno saves her. Her clothes get all ripped up.
As they do.
Yeah.
Constantly.
And so...
Woman has the crappiest clothing.
Yeah. And so he offers her some of his furs to replace her clothing.
Is this the skunk couture?
Yes. So in the movie, she chooses this, what Bethany kind of said, looks like this skunk fur.
It's like a jumpsuit, but like no legs. So it kind of like a bathing suit made of like black and white striped fur with a 6-foot long tail.
Yeah. So in the comic books, she chooses something with a tail too, but they call it the Mermailen's tail. Mermailen's tail. I don't know if that's a real animal, but same thing. She chooses something that has a tail. We get a comedic element out of that in the movie.
Yeah.
Where every time she goes through a door, the door closes on the tail.
Yeah.
And there's a really funny little gag, again, Bethany talking about Jane Fonda's humor, where she tricks the door.
Yeah.
And is able to get her tail through before the door closes. And so it's a funny little moment. It doesn't happen in the comics, but I did another light part of the comic.
Honestly,
the movie.
It's almost like Jane Fonda knew what kind of movie she was in, but nobody else did.
Yeah.
So she behaved as though she was in this campy sex comedy sci-fi adventure. And everybody else played it as though they were in the most serious sci-fi adventure piece they've ever performed in their lives.
Yeah. Now this the scientist named Cull, I maybe think he was the inspiration for the character Dr. Ping.
Yeah.
Because there is no Dr. Ping in the comic, but Dr. Ping is also kind of a scientist. So I guess that's the connection. Although again, just like with Strickno and Mark Hand, Professor Ping's more evil, although he does help Barbarella at the end of this little story. But you got Professor Ping, who was played by Marcel Marceau, the famous mime, who you think you're getting to hear him talk in this movie, but you are not, because his voice is being dubbed by another actor named Robert Ratty.
Righty?
Or something like that. So yeah, you don't get to hear Marcel Marceau's voice. To my knowledge, the only time in a movie you ever actually hear Marcel Marceau's voice is in Mel Brooks' silent movie. He has the one and only piece of dialogue in the entire movie where he just says one word, no.
Good for him.
So, but Dr. Ping, character in the movie that, again, doesn't really serve much of a purpose, in my opinion.
He fixes her ship.
She
goes up to the ship and she's like, I think this is what's wrong with it. And there's a giant hole in it. And it's, it's because women aren't allowed to say like, hey, there's a giant hole in this. Can you fix it? She's got to say like, I don't know. I'm just a woman, but maybe the ship doesn't fly because there's a 6-foot hole in the side of it where the engine should be.
Yeah. So in this story with Strickno and Cull, this genetically altered stag gets out. It tramples Dildano.
Oh, no.
Which is how Dildano dies. So Dildano is now dead in the comic book. Yeah, he lasted 2 stories. This is what I was talking about earlier. Someone does go with them, but then that ends. Strickno then battles the stag to the death. They both end up killing each other.
Good grief. This is a rough pony.
Yeah. But let's get back to Mark Hand, because this is something we talked about earlier. So Mark Hand rescues Barbarella from these little twins, which we'll get to because they have not appeared yet in the comic.
But they are in the comic. So Mark Hand saves her from the kids and their killer dolls, which again, we'll get into. That's in the comic. And the way that he wants to be thanked is to make love. But he wants to do it the old-fashioned way. Which she is horrified by.
Because she's never done it. We find out at this moment that the movie Barbarella is a kind of a virgin.
Well, yes, because it's been deemed as like outdated.
Well, as she says, only the poor.
Yes, only the poor because they can't afford the pills.
Yeah, which again gets into the politics we might talk about later. So
Oh, that makes me sad
Yeah,
thinking
that
about
just
that
hit you
too
now?
much.
So they make love. Again, we don't see it. We see
But we do see Jane Fonda singing a
well,
song.
but now let's get into one of your favorite parts. So again, we see the beginning. So she's getting in onto the bed very awkwardly because again, she doesn't know
Okay,
what's about to
whatever.
happen. And then he's wearing this giant pelt
He's wearing a
fur.
Wookiee costume.
and he then removes it. And I will let you tell this.
And it looks the same, y'all. He's just as hairy underneath.
Yeah, he only pulls it down a little bit. He pulls it down. He doesn't lift it up. He pulls it down.
Because it's like a jumpsuit.
Yeah, and we see this what is
He's
clearly
just as hairy.
clearly pieces of hair that are attached to this actor's chest.
Are we sure?
Yes,
I think
wasn't
he's
even
just
the same,
that hairy.
It wasn't even the same hair color.
As the pelt he was wearing,
yeah,
no,
but not as his hair. So yeah, he's as hairy as the fur. We then get this wide shot of his ship, which is like this.
Oh my gosh, this is so good.
It's like this sailing ship on the ice of the planet they're on, and it just goes in a circle, and we just watch it go in a circle.
Because you can imagine what's going on inside, and that apparently affects the motion of the ocean, as you could say.
There's no ocean, but sure. And
it's not the size of the ship, as the motion of the ocean is what we're getting.
And then we see the end, and that's what Bethany was just talking about. Barbarella is now rolling around in the fur.
You always know when she has had sex the old-fashioned way, because you cut to her naked, surrounded, like covered in things.
She is covered. We're not seeing her.
And then she goes,
nude. Yeah, she's kind of singing to herself. This is then when he offers her the furs to get dressed, and we've already talked about that part. So after going back to the comic, now that Dildano has died, Strickno has died, Barbarella and Cull then get into a ship that then burrows into the planet, which is kind of what happens in the movie.
But it's like it crashes.
Yeah, but then goes into the planet.
Because he like, quote unquote, fixed her ship. And then she goes up and then she crashes because he did a bad job.
I get, yeah. But again, then it like digs through the...
But then,
it's
and
weird.
then there's a whole nother planet under the planet.
But that's the same thing that happens here. It digs through the planet. It arrives now in the comic, she arrives in the snow-covered part of the land.
Okay.
And this is, like I said, this is now kind of where the movie actually starts, if you want to give it a starting point. Even though, like I said, Dildano has already been introduced, Strickno, who I think is supposed to be Mark Hamill, has already been introduced. This is really the moment where the movie starts. Although there's still going to be some stuff that didn't happen in the movie. So now she's at a city called Yesteryear. And this is where she's hit by a snowball that comes out of nowhere.
Right.
There's no rock inside of it. In the movie, we see the little girl put this green gem inside of it so that they can knock her out.
Yeah.
This doesn't happen. She's just hit by the snowball. She turns around, runs after the girl. The girl then uses a little like Barbie doll that then bites Barbarella.
Yeah.
It's just the one doll. It just bites Barbarella. And the chase continues. We then find out there's other kids involved. Now, I say kids. In the movie, it's children. In the comic book, they were more like young adults, teenagers.
Yeah.
It
was slightly less creepy somehow.
Yeah. But they have a little tripwire. They trip her. They capture her. In the comic, they just put her on this, what looks like a sleigh. And it's pulled by this two-headed horse chicken looking thing.
And obviously her clothes get trashed, right?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. In the movie, they put her on this sled that's then led by what looked like a angelfish, stingray.
It was so creepy. It was like one of those like puffer fish that eats slime off the side of your fish tank. It was weird.
Yeah. But the girls, we find out, the two twins, they are named Stomoxis and Glossina. which we actually find out are the names of these twins, but we don't get that until much later in the movie.
Yeah.
When we see them again. But they take her to yesteryear. The city looks like Earth, but during the 1880s. We find out it's because they get radio transmissions from Earth, but apparently the delay is from so far back. So yeah, they're mimicking Earth, but they're in the past. I'll make this quick as much as I can. They get onto this blimp-like ship, which the twins sabotage.
Shocker.
Causes it to crash. Barbarella jumps out with a new male character, Prince Topol. Again, I did not see when he introduced himself.
He's always been there. He's royalty, Laramy.
Yeah, but we find out that his name is Prince Topol. She actually offers herself to him, but they're for saving her out of the ship, the blimp. But then they're interrupted by this weird creature. Topol runs out because he knows the twins are behind it. The twins attack him. They take Barbarella to a crash ship that, as the comic says, has a gang of hooligans in it, who then tie her up and have a bunch of toys attack her, which happens in the movie. Yeah.
And it is so creepy.
It is also like 5 minutes too long.
Yeah.
That scene.
That scene is terrifying.
Because the little dolls with the razor sharp teeth in the movie, they're moving so slow.
Yeah.
But they are filming it from the moment the children started them all the way till they make it to Barbarella.
Yeah, and nobody could have gone just like, let's just start them like half. She's tied up. It's not like she can run.
Just do a jump cut and have them all of a sudden there. But they have the toys, and in the comic, it's a bunch of burying toys. In the movie, they were all dolls. But Topol rescues her. Then we get this panel of, as Topol is tending to Barbarella, there's some old dude who has one of the twins bent over his knee and is spanking her.
That's so gross.
Yeah. Time then passes. I think there was even a panel that talked about how time has passed. Barbarella appears to be living among them. She's dressed in clothing from the turn of the century. She is then attacked by the twins yet again.
She says, "Not today, Satan."
Yeah, but she runs and jumps back onto her ship and then burrows back into the ground. So let me follow you here. She was on a forest jungle type part of the planet. She burrowed into the ground. She's on an icy part of the planet. She has now burrowed into the ground again. And this is where she arrives in Sogo, which is the location of the movie.
This is the 3-layer dip of planets.
And Sogo more has a rocky look to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's supposed to be this elemental thing going. It was wind in the first one, because talked about the icy wind. So I don't know if you got the wind. And then we had the water.
Where's
where
Heart?
the jellyfish. So I don't know if we have all of that. But you get the powers combined. You got Captain Planet.
Captain Planet.
So she arrives in Sogo, which I don't know how true this is, but it is kind of interesting. A lot of people believe that Sogo, and it is capital S-O, capital G-O. And so a lot of people think that it's supposed to be a reference to the biblical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah.
I agree with that, just specific, because I did not read this part of the comic, but based on the movie, how it was portrayed.
Yeah, it's pretty much it's a land of evil.
Especially considering what they do to Pygar.
Yeah, it's a land of evil. It's the main city part of Sogo, and the palace is surrounded by a labyrinth. In the comic, as soon as she burrows up and is now in Sogo, she meets a character by the name of Durand.
Not the titular Durand.
Well, not titular, because titular would be Barbarella.
I just really wanted to say titular, Laramy.
But this isn't the Durand from the movie, though they used the same name, but apparently it was so good they had to use it twice. In the comic, it's just Durand, and he's an old guy with an eye patch, and his clothes are all raggy, and we do find out he's from Earth, but he says he left centuries ago. And then for some reason, Barbarella says, I think my name's Barbarella, but I'm not sure. I don't know what happened to her while she was burrowing.
She bumped her
has
head.
Forgot her name. We then find out that people get lost in the labyrinth, and
Well, David Bowie comes, he steals your baby, and then
she says, well, why don't you climb the walls and get a better look? And he explains that, well, if you climb the walls, you're attacked by air sharks.
God, I hate those air sharks.
Yeah.
Man.
In the comic book, we then see a man with...
So wait, hold on.
Go
No,
ahead.
pause. So Barbarella invented the Sharknado?
I had the very thought of that was the Sharknado when this happened. But no, these are just flying sharks.
They got to get up there somehow, Laramy. Why not a Sharknado?
Yeah. We then see a man with what they refer to as perforating leprosy. So he has a bunch of holes in his body.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually see a guy like this in the movie.
Yes.
And it's a pretty cool little effect where we see this guy. Although in the movie, they explain that it's a person wasting away.
Yeah,
in the
it's like they're
labyrinth.
losing hope.
Yeah.
And
But he is doing it in the comic book. He's climbing the wall to commit suicide. And of course, as soon as he gets to the top of the wall, he's then attacked by the air sharks who then eat him. Durand then takes Barbarella to meet our next character, which is Pygar.
Pygar!
Yeah,
Pygar!
yeah, she says his name
Pygar!
so much. Pygar in the movie is played by John Philip Law. We find out that he's the last of his kind, which they do give a name. I didn't write it down. They do give the name to his people, but he's an angel. I mean,
he even
he's an
at
angel.
some point
He
in the
calls
movie
himself
calls
an
himself.
angel. Yeah.
Okay, but we're not going to talk about how he's introduced in the movie.
Go ahead.
So, in the movie, Barbarella lands in Sogo, falls out of her plane or passes out from her plane, and then
While she's laying unconscious.
While she's laying unconscious, Pygar walks up to her, and you just see these male hands on her body, and of course he gropes her chest, and it's just, and she wakes up and she's got this face like, what?
Yeah, but it's because Pygar is blind,
Yes.
and so he's trying to figure out what it is. In the same thing in the comic, he's blind. But we do get more of why he's blind and why he is the way he is. So Pygar, because he is an angel, because he can fly, he has tried to make it to the tower. But he was always taken out by the guards and captured. They clipped his wings at one point. And then when he healed, he tried again. They then plucked him like a chicken. They blinded him. And, this is now why he just doesn't do it anymore.
He's lost the hope to fly.
Yeah, which is what they really lay into in the movie.
How, Laramy? How does he get the hope to fly back?
Well, we'll get to that.
What could she possibly do for him?
Yeah, we'll get to that. So in the comic, they say, well, if we can't go above the labyrinth, let's go below the labyrinth. Because
Can't
again,
go over it. Can't go around.
she has a ship that can dig through the ground. So they go back to Barbarella's ship, but the guards destroy it. They blow it up. Now I want to talk about the guards really quick. They are called the Black Guards. The comic and the movie, they're pretty much the same. They are these leather men.
Yeah, they are.
They are nothing but leather. Like there's no person inside of them. There's nothing. They are just pieces of leather that are shaped like people. In the comic, Barbarella actually tries to distract them by, again, removing her shirt.
As you do.
She then shoots a couple of them. Her gun jams. She's not able to get to the last one. And then Pygar actually grabs the last one and then just squeezes it until it pops. Now, I do want to point out Pygar now I realized they couldn't do this in the movie. Pygar in the comic is giant.
Huh.
Like Barbarella comes up to like his belly.
Huh.
So he's a giant person. But back to Pygar in the movie. So Bethany talked about him not having the will. Well, because Pygar has rescued her, as she does, her way of thanking them is that she wants to sleep with him.
And so they go to his nest.
Yes.
Like a bird's nest. Like the nest of an eagle.
Yeah. And we see her wake up, and she's covered in like this. She's like laying in this green moss.
Yeah, and feathers. And
she's got her little souvenir feather. And
meanwhile, Pygar is doing victory rolls in the sky.
He's flying around. Her ability has given him back his will to fly.
I will not say the phrase that just popped into my head. You're welcome.
I appreciate it. So just like in the comic, Pygar then agrees to fly Barbarella to the city. This is the one time we actually see Barbarella do some action.
In the whole movie, this is the one time.
She uses her little gun to shoot down the black guards.
It's like the tiny gun from Men in Black.
Yeah.
It's that size. And then she runs out of battery, and so she sticks it in his underpants.
Which for some odd reason is also feathered. Like, I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah. He's got feather panties. She sticks it in.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't need this anymore, and my outfit doesn't come with pockets, but here.
Yeah. So they make it to the main city of Sogo, right outside the palace. In the movie, Barbarella makes a comment of oh, we need to hide you and hide your wings, although they never do.
How are you gonna hide them, Laramy?
I don't know.
Just get a big coat.
But in the comic, they mention that he needs to hide, and Pygar says, "I have friends that can hide me." And then we see the friends show up, and Pygar just disappears with them, so that Barbarella can move on with her story. In the comic, she is then approached by a couple of beggars. That's it, beggars. Like, Barbarella even turns and goes, "Who are these beggars?" All of a sudden, both of the beggars are then murdered by this eye-patched woman.
In the movie, she does not kill. Barbarella doesn't kill them, but they are clearly about to rape her.
Oh wait, I didn't mean Barbarella kills the beggars.
The queen kills them.
Well, yeah, which we don't know is the queen at the time.
Sorry, spoiler alert.
Yeah, this eye-patched woman with some blades kill the beggars, or in the case of the movie, kills the potential
murderers.
Murderers
and rapists.
Yes. And I will say though, in the movie, her little blades and the spinning she does of them, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But she calls Barbarella
pretty.
Yeah. Which in the comic, she keeps calling her Pretty One. She doesn't say pretty.
The pretty. I'm going to call Laramy that from now on, everybody.
Which Bethany tied this in earlier with a Labyrinth tie-in to the movie Labyrinth. This is where you can start getting into the Wizard of Oz tie-in.
It's true.
Here, because you've got who essentially is the Wicked Witch, calling her
I'll get
pretty.
You, my pretty.
Some guards show up. These
and
are not
little angel.
These are not the black guards. These are just regular guards. They show up and escort Barbarella to the palace because she has been chosen by the queen. Little do we know that this eye-patched woman is the queen. When they arrive, this is not in the movie, although I think this could have been a really funny bit. When they arrive, there's a revolution going on inside the palace, which she then finds out is all being staged. That the queen just gets bored, and so she has some people fake a revolution.
Now that sounds like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually really funny in the comic, because you got this one guy runs up to the main guard, who is named Captain Sun. There's a guy credited as Captain Sun in the movie, but I didn't figure out where he was, so I didn't quite get this. But guy runs up to Captain Sun, and he goes, "Sir, I just want you to know, I feel compelled to take your sword from you right now." And Captain Sun says, "Of course." He goes, "And I might add, you forgot to take my pistol last time, which could cost you dearly." And I just think that for the comedy that kind of played in the movie, I think that could have been a funny little.
That would have been fun.
But
especially since this is the point of the movie where it starts to really drag.
Yeah, there's another one of the rebels who comes up and says, Captain Sun, if you don't mind, I feel compelled to use you as a human shield. And and Captain Sun is like, but of course. And so they take both Captain Sun and Barbarella as kind of hostages. Although Barbarella makes a reference that the rebel is fondling her, which we do get the shot of the hands cupping her. Although she finds out that he was actually placing a note inside of her cleavage.
As you do.
Yeah, I'm sure she didn't have pockets anywhere. She's wearing like a skin tight.
That's why she had to put her gun in Pygar's crotch. Yeah. So.
Well, again, that didn't happen in the comic.
But
she discovers that the note is telling her that there's actually going to be a real revolt. But she immediately says, well, that's obviously a trap. A hand then comes out of a wall. Yeah, here we go.
Hey, this is a Deus Ex Machina.
A hand comes out of a wall, offers her a gun. She takes the gun and says, I'm going to use it right now. Shoots the wall that the hand came out of, which then shatters. Apparently also kills the girl who handed her the gun. Probably perfectly innocent, this girl was. But she has been killed, and it reveals the queen, who we can't see. She's in this long veil. She has what they describe as a blue wig, although you can't really tell that from the way it's drawn. But you can't see her. She then tells Barbarella she knows her, and she goes, well, you don't know me because my name is not just Barbarella. It's Barbarella Bagora de Vampira, from a long line of blood drinkers and venom suckers.
What?
Yeah.
So she's a vampire?
I don't know.
She's vampire?
I don't know. Because the queen says, I'm not impressed. And it's never brought up again.
That queen is savage.
Yeah, the queen just goes, okay. And
Get over
it's
it.
never mentioned again. There is never anything else mentioned again.
Look, we all had that friend, that goth friend in high school who was like, nah, guys, now I'm a vampire. I'm a bloodsucker. We're like, okay, whatever. And then a week later, they were over it. Yeah. So maybe that's what this was.
So in the movie, the queen, which there's not a lot to this queen. No. I will mention that the queen is played by a character named, or not a character, an actor named Anita Pallenberg. But I couldn't really find an awful lot about her that would have been
interesting to
mention. But she plays the queen, and when we're introduced to her in the movie, she's also in this like teepee looking thing, but she immediately steps out of it.
Yeah.
What happens in the comic is Barbarella just snatches the wig and the veil, and it reveals that the queen's the one-eyed woman. Now she's still got the eye patch. And so it's very obvious, although she goes, you're the saint, you're the one-eyed woman from earlier. And Captain Sun says, well, the queen may well be all women.
What?
And yeah, that's exactly what I went. What? I'm like, is she
that all women are queens?
Or is she the Medusa character that all takes the look of other women? But again, that's also never brought up again. The queen then says she needs to be taken to the birds. The birds. Like, she really says it like that in the comic. And so just like in the movie, this happens in the movie, she is put into this cage, and some birds start to come out.
But they're the cutest little birds.
Well, and in the comic, she even goes, oh, these cute little birds. But then there's so many of them.
Yeah. And they obviously destroy her clothing.
Yeah, and so they start to attack her. Now, in the movie, Jane Fonda was actually very concerned about this scene.
I'm sure.
Because she was worried she was actually going to hurt these birds.
And this was before, like, the ASPCA came on sets and made sure that animals were taken care of.
Yeah. So in the comic, she's actually then rescued by Captain Sun. Although she doesn't trust him, so she immediately kills him.
Yeah, that's fair.
Although finds out that he was actually on her side.
Well,
and
you know, you got to be careful.
was part of the revolution. And then before he dies, he tells her that the queen's weakness is sleep. And that's all he says, sleep.
Me too.
But let's get into now the movie. In the movie, she's being attacked by the birds. And then all of a sudden, the bottom of the bird cage opens.
She goes down like a Chuck E. Cheese slide.
Yeah, she goes down this tube. And that's when she ends up with Daldano, which we've already talked about that scene.
I will say there was one thing from that scene that I meant to mention when we were talking about it earlier. At some point, Daldano looks at her and says, "How are you compared to other Earth girls?" And she says, "I'm about average."
Yeah.
Well, you know, that line was then repurposed years later in the Wonder Woman movie, where they said, "How are you compared to other Amazon women?" "I'm about average."
Very nice. Did not know that. Didn't
And
run across
more
that.
you know.
But so we've already talked about the Dildano scene, but in the Dildano scene, we find out also about the queen being in this sleep room chamber.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that as we get to that part of the comic. So in the comic at this point, she now then jumps onto Sun's ship, which is piloted by a robot named Dictor. Yep. His name is Dictor. While they are being shot at, again, while they are being shot at,
So ridiculous.
Barbarella asks this robot if he is, quote unquote, fully functional. Now, I will point out, this is the only time in the comic in which Barbarella uses sex for something other than to show gratitude or to achieve something. This is her
She's
just
achieving something.
This is her
Laramy.
just really wanting to actually make love to this robot. And so they do. Yeah. Go
I'm
ahead.
broken.
Yeah.
No.
Go ahead.
No, you don't want me to go ahead. Continue.
So once they finish, Dictor is putting his pants back on. Yep, he's putting his pants back on. And Barbarella asks if there's got to be some way she can get into the palace. He then tells her that there's another robot named, I'm assuming it's supposed to be Gromph 2 and not like Gromph the second. Gromph 2, who is the palace caretaker, and he will help her get back into the palace. This is where we start tying into the movie character Duran Duran.
Yeah.
Because Duran Duran is in the movie, he's the queen's concierge, and so he's the one that kind of guides her, brings her in.
But you don't know it's Duran Duran at that time.
Yes,
When you
we
first
just know
meet him in the movie.
it's the concierge. But in the comic, Gromph gets her into the palace and then immediately betrays her. Immediately.
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal.
Which kind of, this in the way this plays out in the movie, she gets into the palace and then finds out they've got Pygar pretty much stapled to this wall.
They crucify him.
Now that doesn't happen yet. That does come out in the comic. But she enters this room and then she's sprayed by this stuff that knocks her out. And she is given to the master locksmith. Okay, so now Gromph the second, or Gromph 2, and the master locksmith, you put those together, that's Duran Duran from the movie.
Okay.
So let's talk about Duran Duran. So Duran Duran is played by Milo O'Shea, very kind of famous character actor. Bethany's already mentioned that this is also where the 80s band got their name. They just took the D off of it.
Because Durand is really hard to say.
Yeah. So they're just Duran Duran. But here's where this starts tying in. So not only, like I said, gets into the palace, but then she's handed over to the master locksmith, who then places her in the excessive machine. Yeah, this is, I know, something we're going to get off on. So the excessive machine in the movie looks like kind of a piano. Go ahead.
It's his sex organ.
Yeah. So, as he plays it, the little tumblers or whatever
He
you
is
would
going
call
to
them.
pleasure her to death.
Yeah. So in the comic, it doesn't look like a piano. It looks like just some sort of,
like a coffin-ish thing?
kind of, but it's got a bunch of curves and whatnot to it for all of the hoses that are sticking into it. He tortures her with it, just like Duran Duran tries to do in the movie, but her sexuality is so powerful
Yes.
that it doesn't affect her. Now, in the comic, that's not really entirely implied. He's torturing her with it, and then he's about to kill her with it. He said, this can also, kill you. And then he's about to kill her with it, but she says, well, before you do, I just have one last question. How is sleep the queen's weakness? And she finds out that the queen can't sleep, that her evilness is so heavy and the guilt is so heavy that she is not able to sleep. So she needs this machine that dispenses dreams because it's the only way she can relax.
You know what? That actually makes more sense
Yeah.
than the movie did.
Yeah. In the movie, we're told by Dildano that she is in this chamber. It's her sleep chamber. She locks herself into it.
They don't explain what the sleep chamber is. It's just that's the only time she's vulnerable.
Yes. And so now back to the comic. Once the locksmith hears this, he says, you know what? I'll agree to release you if you can take out the queen. So he releases her. He gives her a key. Now, let's talk about the key.
Yes, please.
So in the comic book, it is just this like double key. That's all it is. It's just this. It's a key that kind of
that's boring.
goes and has two.
You know what'd be really cool is if it was an invisible key.
Yeah. So in the movie, Dildano goes to give her the key.
Who's just an idiot. That's his main character trait, is he's an idiot.
He opens up this box that has a little pillow in it, and the key's supposed to be invisible, but then they grab at the pillow, and there's no
It's not
key
there.
So then they do this whole search around. Dildano's just feeling around, trying to find this key. Yeah.
But here's the thing, is there's at some point where they're like, oh, Dildano is out there with with Ping. He'll save us. How? Like, what? At what point in this movie has he led you to think he is in any way capable of accomplishing anything?
So I will say that although the key is invisible, it makes a lot of noise.
Yeah.
He hangs it around her neck, which they do. It's a subtle little joke, but as he's trying to clasp it, like he's having difficulty doing it, and he very quietly makes a line. He goes, "It's invisible." Like,
yeah.
Because it makes it hard for him to be able to clasp it around her neck. And in the movie, Duran Duran finds out she has the key. Although how the key did not fly off of her like all of her clothes do.
Well, it was invisible, Laramy. The machine didn't know it was there.
But finds out he has the key, and she's like, okay, well, I'll take you to her chamber.
But first, new outfit, please.
Yes. She asks for a piece of like fabric, and it turns into this entire outfit.
Super cute. Green little jumpsuit.
Yeah. So they get to the chamber, which has an invisible wall, of course.
Which is why you need an invisible key.
They can't figure out where the keyhole is.
That was so funny. She's like, I'm trying. Like, she literally walks into the wall. Yeah. And then she's trying to find it, and Duran Duran's getting so mad. And she's like, well, it's invisible, so...
Which then, apparently, the way to open it was just to take the key and drop it?
Yeah.
Because that's what
they threw it into some sort of puddle? Or...
Yeah, and she goes in. There's another key on the inside that the queen has. Duran Duran takes that key, runs back out, drops it, so he locks her in.
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal.
Now, this is the same thing that happens in the comic. The locksmith, after she uses the double key to get in, he locks it behind her. and says, well, she had already started, like, there was this dream had started, and Barbarella's messing with the controls, and he goes, "Oh, that's quite a nightmare that you're creating for her. Too bad you'll be stuck in it as well," and locks her in. So what happens? This is where things get really crazy. So what happens
this moment right here?
What happens in the comic is the queen wakes up. They kind of have some back and forth, although the queen, it's not really like an attack or anything. And they realize they got to get out. The queen says, "Well, there's a trap door at the end of the bed."
Of course there is.
So, and it's like, it leads to a velvet ladder that leads to a velvet staircase. So they escape through that. They then end up at the Chamber of Ultimate Solution, although that is not how it's named in the comic. It's not named at all in the comic. But let's go back to that in the movie. Earlier in the movie, the queen introduced Barbarella to the Chamber of Ultimate Solution, which is where this thing called the Mathmas lived.
Yeah.
This, like, gelatinous
Evil
creature
lava
of some
lamp.
sort. Yeah, evil lava lamp. There is no name for it in the comic. They never name it. They just call it a creature. And the queen explains in the comic that she can have the creature unleash its venom, which can destroy pretty much anything. But she's worried that if she releases too much of it, it may destroy all of Sogo. And then they kind of move on. They get onto a little ship. This is now where we find out that Pygar is being crucified, which we also see in the movie. Barbarella then attacks the queen. They free Pygar. They escape with the queen in a ship. The ship crashes, as every ship has
everything does.
Yeah.
She is the worst driver.
Yeah. Barbarella runs into Durand. Now, again, this is in the comic, so this is just the old guy, Durand. And he has a band of rebels.
Good.
This is where Bethany's kind of talking to. It's supposed to be Dildano and Ping that are leading the rebels.
Yeah. And they're like, Dildano will save us.
Yeah.
And, no, he won't.
So we find out
idiot.
We find out the queen has escaped, and we believe she has released the venom. We find out she hasn't, but we believe she's released the venom. It begins to flood the labyrinth. Now, in the movie, the way they escape the chamber is the queen activates the Mathmas, and then the bed gets lowered into the Mathmas, but a bubble forms around the bed because the Mathmas is so evil and Barbarella is so pure and innocent that it does that to protect itself from Barbarella.
Yeah.
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 That made sense.
So dumb.
In the movie, they then are, what do they say? Spewed up by the Mathmas, and it just so happens to be right next to where Pygar is laying, like on the top of the labyrinth.
That was so convenient. Thank you, Mathmas.
And that's roughly where the movie's going to end. So we'll get to that in a minute. Let's go back to how the comic then proceeds. So they are climbing the walls of the labyrinth. Now remember the air sharks. The air sharks now apparently don't seem to be a problem because as the venom has flooded the labyrinth, it's pushed the atmosphere and the air pressure or something up.
That's just science, Laramy.
Which kind of does make sense because you got to think the air sharks never came into the labyrinth.
Yeah.
So, but then the queen shows up on a boat with some of her guards, and she tells them that it was Kronf 2, the robot, that led a revolt and usurped the throne.
Okay.
Yeah. Whereas in the movie, it's Durand,
yeah.
who takes the throne. And then even though they do the Mathmas thing, they also have him get onto his ray gun, and he immediately kills Daldano. He immediately kills Ping. He's just murdering people left, right, up, and down.
Yes.
But the Mathmas then it starts destroying even the palace and takes everything down. In the comic book, the Mathmas has loosened the ground. You ready for this? And mountain mussels. Like
What?
yeah, like mussels, like the shellfish,
Okay.
begin coming up in the venom, and they are, yeah, and they attack the ship.
Good.
The ship, though,
That'll show them.
The boat then apparently also has to be able to fly. So it starts to fly, and they go, oh yeah, we got out of that. Unfortunately, the mussels are causing an earthquake, which then destroys the palace, because they were flying towards the palace. But the earthquake destroys the palace. Then, guess what? Because they're in a ship now. The ship was damaged too much by the mussels, so it starts to fall.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so, and I left this part out. The queen actually agreed to help all the survivors. So all the survivors started getting into all the boats that the guards were in. So I guess you're supposed to assume they got out fine. But the one that Pygar, Barbarella, and the queen were in starts to fall. Pygar then grabs Barbarella and the queen, just like the movie then ends, and flies away. And Barbarella asks, why would you save her for all the bad things she did to you? And Pygar says, this is the last line of the comic, it's the last line of the movie, an angel has no memory. And when I was sitting there reading this comic, I read that line, and Bethany was sitting in the room, even though I was just reading it to myself. And I just went, really?
Laramy, that common thing. Angels do not know things. They forgot the minute it happened.
Yeah.
You know what we didn't talk about?
What's that?
When Barbarella pulled the gun out of his panties when he
when he was being crucified
from the other side.
Yeah.
She tucked it in through the top, and then she reached in from the bottom and pulled it back out.
Yeah. All right. So that's this whole story. So you do not have to read this comic. You're welcome. You do not have to watch this movie. You're also welcome.
Or are you?
Yeah. I mean, it's a cult classic. If you want to just watch a bad movie, watch a bad movie.
We enjoyed hate watching it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I read this comic twice.
You did. You're such a trooper.
So, let's kind of talk about the main thing that kind of wraps this back around and gets Bethany a moment to talk a little bit more about it, and that's the idea of sex in both the comic and the movie. Now, in the comic, as I mentioned earlier, it's a way for Barbarella to show appreciation.
Right.
It's a way that she gets out of trouble, although it doesn't always work for her that way, and it's something she just enjoys. Like I said, that
is part of the sexual revolution of women are finally at a place where they can enjoy sex because of the invention of the birth control pill.
Yeah. In the movie, though, as we talked about, society has advanced beyond the physical stuff. It hasn't been eliminated. As we said earlier, the poor still do it the traditional way. Which, if we want to get into the politics, I mean, that gets into a very political thing about
healthcare
and also it's not there's not the equality that clearly, even though there's peace in this galactic world that Barbarella is from, there's still there's a classism.
Yes, absolutely. And you can go into, you basically have to be not even wealthy, but like of a certain class to be able to afford basic health needs. One of the most amazing things about the birth control pill that I don't think a lot of people our age, at least I didn't until I really started learning about the invention of the birth control pill. Before that, a woman's ability to choose whether or not she had children was completely up to the male partner she had. Like, it was up to them to use birth control, whatever that may be. And a woman was just hoping that, and a lot of men didn't want to, and that's why women didn't work because they were constantly getting pregnant. Women had dozens is exaggerating, but they had tons of kids. It kind of plays into this idea of lower class people who couldn't afford things like birth control, who couldn't afford things like basic health care, can't really take part in this sexual revolution. Like the even middle class people are able to.
Yeah. But again, in the movie, we talked about this earlier, Barbarella actually has physical sex for the first time in the movie with Mark Hand. The act also rejuvenates Pygar, as we talked about, gives him the will to fly. In the movie, though, there's a part where she tells Mark Hand that their psychocardiogram needs to be in sync in order to make love with the pill. But then later when she does that with Daldano, that's not even brought up.
Although that makes you wonder if that's why she finished first.
Or that's why he starts smoking. Like, we didn't mention that. Like, his hands start smoking.
And
and
her
then
hair curls, his hair, like, it's like he stuck his finger in a light socket.
But also, with all of the stuff with sex and all that in this movie, there's actually only one kiss. And that is between Barbarella and Pygar right before she opens this particular door. I can't remember the moment.
Yeah.
But they kiss, and it is the only kiss in the entire movie.
Right.
Yeah. So, let's get into final decisions. We've talked long enough. Final decisions: bag it, stack it, or trade it. What say you, Bethany?
I am gonna stack it. It is not my favorite movie. I might watch it again as a more of like a, hey, you should see this movie. It's kind of fun. But I wouldn't like sit down and go like, ooh, I want to watch Barbarella. I'm in a Barbarella kind of mood. And maybe like 15, 20 years from now, I might go like, man, it's been a long time since I've seen Barbarella. It's fine. It's got a, Jane Fonda, even early on in her career, showed that she was extremely talented. She's very funny. If it were not her in this movie, if she wasn't as strong as she was, this movie would be unwatchable.
Yeah. And I will point out, I think a lot of people may be misinformed that this was like her first big role. It was not.
No.
She was an established actress at this point.
I would actually like to quote Jane Fonda. She had just finished filming this movie called Any Wednesday, where she played just basically your typical female lead in a romantic comedy. And she made a comment that she was afraid that if she kept playing silly young women on screen, she might become a silly young woman off screen. So that's when she started making bigger choices. She was in, I can't remember the name of the other movie that her husband directed her in. There was that, there was this, and then she was in Barefoot in the Park. She, she did this movie called They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And that was a really big turning point for her. And
well, she had just done Cat Ballou.
Yeah.
As well. Which, earned one of her co-stars an Oscar.
Right. I mean, it may come as a surprise. She never wanted to act. That was not her passion. She eventually did. She actually trained with Strasberg, with Marilyn Monroe. And even though her father was a long established actor, she proved very early on that she was just as capable as her dad and set herself apart from him pretty quickly. This movie would be, I said it already, completely unwatchable if she weren't as strong and interesting to watch. And it has nothing to do with her body, has nothing to do with the script. Lord knows it has nothing to do with the script. But she is funny and she is interesting to watch.
All right, so since you picked this as our Valentine movie for this year, what are your thoughts on it as a date movie?
I think it would be fun. Like, I mean, just sitting there, if you've got a person that you're interested in that, enjoys laughing and watching a silly movie, it's fun, it's sexy, it's silly, it's you don't have to think too hard about it. If you start making out halfway through it and then you get back into it, nobody's gonna have missed anything.
All right, I'm also gonna give it a stack it. The film works as a sci-fi movie of the 60s, as well as, like I kind of said, it's a well-done comic book adaptation. It does tell the story, or at least, a good chunk, probably about 2/3 of the comic book. It tells the story well. Going into the stuff that Barbarella's kind of looked upon as negatively, look, she doesn't do anything that Captain Kirk didn't do in Star Trek.
Well, and then to be fair, also, during that time, the stuff that she was doing was revolutionary. Yeah. In our 2022 eyes, it's outdated. But then it was huge. She was a woman having sex for pleasure, which didn't happen.
So, and the film, as well as the comic, balances the idea of Barbarella being seen as a creature of beauty, as well as a strange and bizarre creature, which they relate in both ways. As Bethany said, Fonda delivers the character with just the right amount of humor. She's the best part of the movie. She responds to what she encounters when it's needed, right. And she accepts things that the audience doesn't need explained.
Yeah,
and we just roll with it, and it works out for me. So that was Barbarella. That was our Valentine's episode for the year. Obviously I'll have Bethany on again for other episodes, but this was our annual Valentine's Day episode.
Happy Valentine's Day, honey.
Happy Valentine's Day to you as well. And we hope everyone out there enjoys their Valentine's Day, whether it's with your significant other or you just enjoying time to yourself. I know that I used to call this Single Awareness Day.
Until you met me.
This is true. But enjoy your time. Share it with someone out there, even if it's just another single friend, just for the two of you to hang out and enjoy. Then hey, watch Barbarella. Again, it is on Pluto, at least at the time of this recording. You can find it on Pluto TV, so you can watch it for free. Not have to worry about paying for it. But that's it for today. Thank you again, Bethany, and for Moving Panels. I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world, so many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Hell, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop culture roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from three nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.